Welcome to the Vineyard Church podcast. For more information, visit us at vkcwest.com.
Well, we are in a 3-week series in Habakkuk, and next week we'll take a break for Marcellus to share with us, but and then we'll finish up on the 25th. But a little bit of recap from last week, if you were here or if you weren't. The prophet Habakkuk is dialoguing with God. He has questions. He has questions for God, not of God, but for God. Not about God, but for God. He knows God, and he's like, hey, things don't seem to be lining up here. I know these things about you. What's going on? And he was asking his questions of God, and his heart is broken for the things that would be important to God, the state of the people of Israel. And he doesn't get an answer, and so there's silence. And so last chapter, we see God finally answers him. And God tells him, like, hey, I'm going to actually send the Babylonians to come and take care of Israel and set things right. And he's like, whoa, not that way. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? I mean, with all my infinite wisdom, God, let me show you direction. And that's where we ended last week. And so we know that things end up him going from complaining and questions to a great confidence in God. And that's kind of what we're asking God to do in our hearts and our lives, because you have questions, you have complaints per se of God. And those things that you would journey with God during this month of saying, God, would you bring me from questions to confidence in you too? And so we pick up today with Habakkuk waiting on God, waiting for another answer. But today, I think that what he's learning is he's learning contentment. And to help us with that, I was thinking about when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And some of you guys, you remember Thrifty's ice cream? Did they have Thrifty's around here? No? Maybe it was under another name, like in Kansas. But in California, a couple other former Californians here, there was Thrifty's ice cream. So you go in, you get a single scoop of ice cream for 10 cents. This is when I was, and then you get a double scoop for 15. And if you wanted the triple, I don't know how they jumped to a quarter if you wanted a triple scoop. And so my friend Brandon and I went in to Thrifty's this one day, and again, 8 or 9, and we both had a quarter. And so Brandon orders first, and he orders a single scoop. Out of all the things I've seen in the world, that shocked me more than anything. And I said, Brandon, what are you doing? And he goes, I just want the single. I said, but you can get a triple. And he says, well, I'm content with one. I said, what is this content you speak of? What is this thing? You're this weird magic you're saying. And of course, I ordered a triple. And so I had 2 more scoops of ice cream, but Brandon had 15 cents left, right? But contentment is kind of like that when you see it. It's kind of like, wait, what is this? Because it's very hard to get. Some people describe contentment as this, the satisfied heart. That my heart is satisfied. The restful soul. That when someone asked you, how's your soul? They would say, I'm full of rest. Or the grateful spirit. Another person said that contentment is the uncoveting joy of those who own the word enough, no matter how much or little they have. 16th and 17th century preacher Jeremiah Burroughs said about contentment, he said, about Christian contentment, to be clear, that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. Ignatius of Loyola, which would come like Ignatian spirituality under the Christian realm, he used the following terms. He used the terms disinterest and detachment in regard to all created things. That we would be so interested in God that wanting more of the created things or the things of this life, we would be disinterested in them. Or that we would be so attached to the person of Jesus that it was as if we were completely detached from the things of this life and this world because we're so attached to him. Dallas Willard, an author, philosopher that I enjoy, he said, "The world is a perfectly good and safe place to be." That's a good entryway to contentment. I think a lot of our uncontentment comes from that, well, we got to get more, we got to get this, we got to get that because it's unsafe. Well, what if? But Willard really pushed and says, this is a good world. He actually said that the first thing that someone should learn about God is from 1 John 1:5, and it says that God is light and in him is no darkness at all. In other words, this is ultimately his world, and he's loving and he's good and he has good for you. So how do we gain contentment? Well, the Apostle Paul points us in the right direction in Philippians. He says this in Philippians 4:11 through 13. He says, "For I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength." So I have learned, Paul says. So we learn contentment. It's something that we can't just be given and then it's ours, but it's something that we learn and walk through. It comes through difficulty. It comes through walking through things that are hard. It comes through having good things happen to us and bad things happen to us. And all the while, we learn this thing of contentment. And ultimately, it's really knowing and being known by God that produces contentment in us. And so this is where Habakkuk is at. I believe he has these questions, he has these things going on, and now he's in the midst of learning contentment. But there's a whole lot of discussion as they go. So verse 1 of Habakkuk 2, we see that he's in a position to learn. And so verse 1, it says, "I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint." So chapter 1, we see him share, God, I want you to fix things in Israel, but not that way. I want you to fix what's wrong, but I don't want you to do it that way. I almost liked it better when you were silent, because now that you're working, it's even more uncomfortable that you would use a more evil people to take care of the somewhat evil people of Israel. And he's just waiting. He doesn't hear back right away. But he does something that many times we may not, which is he brings his complaint to God, he brings his questions to God, and then he digs his feet in and says, I'm going to listen. I'm going to wait. I'm not going to walk away from this, just let out what I need to say and then move on. But God, I'm positioned here in this place to see what happens. In California, so I grew up surfing since I was about 11 years old. And so surfing is all about positioning yourself. It's all about knowing where the wave's breaking and knowing where, you need to be to get in position. And if you're out of position, it's a terrible time because you just get run around and people coming after you, catching you and stuff with their boards, all sorts of things, and making everybody mad, if you're in the wrong place. So it's all about position. I was thinking about this. I've said that before, and people are like, Cody, you're not in California. So I said, so let's put it this way. So you have a deer blind. Is that better? Is that good? Getting closer, right? And so it's all about position. You need to know, are there deer walking by your deer blind? Is that a good place to be? Mark, is that good? Deer blind? Okay, good. I'm trying. And so positioning yourself to learn from God. And so he doesn't hear back, but he sees God as an active person. He knows that he's going to give an answer, so much so that the last part of verse 1, and what answer I am to give to this complaint. He's saying, what will I say to God when he rebukes me? Like he knows. He's like, I know that I probably don't see what's going on with the right eyes completely. And so when God does answer me, he's going to let me have it a little bit. He's going to say, hey, I am doing this, but you need to know something. Your heart is off here, or you don't see this here. It's deeper than you may think of what's happening. In verse 2, we see that God wants him to open up to bigger things, to see what his problem is, what he sees in the bigger context of the work of God in history. In essence, he's going to have a Copernican shift. Michelle and I, we were at Home Depot the other day up in Omaha, and I met somebody that needed to have a Copernican shift. I didn't tell him, but I told her. Do you know what that is? Copernicus is the one that figured out that the earth rotated around the sun, not the sun around the earth. So think about it. And, he's realizing that, what if I joined God's bigger deal? What if my deal and what I'm experiencing is not like everything's going to fail if this doesn't happen? What if there's bigger things going on than just what I'm going through or what I'm feeling? And what if I could take my little context and my little circumstances and put them in the bigger story of God? And so in verse 2, the Lord replies, and he says, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time, and it speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. So God commands Habakkuk to write down his Q&A time with God. And some people think it's just the next two verses there to write down. Others think it's this entire book. In other words, he was going through this process but wasn't writing it down. God wanted him to write it down. We don't know, but we know that he wants him to write it down and to make it plain so that somebody else can understand what's being said. And in verse 2, where it says, so that a herald may run with it, the NIV makes a decision here. Anytime you read a certain translation, they make certain decisions with certain words, Hebrew or Greek, or and they decide, well, we're going to push it this way. And I think the NIV here pushes this a little bit more than it's supposed to, because in the original, it really just means so that the one that hears may run. And so think about that. Write down this vision, what I'm sharing, so that others, when they hear it, may run. I think that what's going on here is not so much that this is so that a herald may take it different places. I mean, that may well be what happens when people hear this. But I think that this whole book of Habakkuk is actually to make it so that we can run, that there's something here that can set us free, like contentment, of actually being in a place where we trust God above all things and we actually can settle down into a good life in this life. That we can actually run. Because think about running. Any runners in here? Yeah, okay, couple? All right, here and there. But, I run sometimes, I ran once, but we do have some pretty serious runners in the church. And I like watching them. See some of them drive right through here. Hey, good to see you running. Dane, you're a runner. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. That kind of running. Yeah, and so if you were to see Dane run, just take off. But it doesn't look good when you see somebody run that likes to run. And running would be, I think, a good example of contentment. I think you have to be content to run because you kind of just push out other things that are going on. You have to push away maybe at certain points like pain, You need to forget about other things, and you just get a pace and a gait. And sometimes you get different winds that come in, and you're just content. And so I think with what Habakkuk is hearing from God is that this whole book, this whole thing is actually something that's a gift to set us free, that when we hear it, we can run. And so ask God, as you're listening, as you're reading through it, God, would you help me to run in my life? Now, when he says the revelation, verse 3, awaits an appointed time, and it speaks of the end and will not prove false, he's talking about a couple things. He's talking about the Babylonians, which, look, the Babylonians are going to come, and they are going to set things straight in Israel. But you and the people around you may not see it. But still write it down and tell people. But he's also talking about the big picture of what he will do ultimately through Messiah. And so he's calibrating Habakkuk, saying, you see these problems right now. You're taking a snapshot of what's going on, but I want you to take that and put it into the bigger thing of the work that's going on. I want you to open up to the work of God. I want you to open up to what's happening, and that will bring freedom in your life. And so picture Jesus, right? One of the most disturbing, pictures of the New Testament. That the disciples and Jesus were in a boat on a lake, and a great squall, a great storm came in, and the disciples thought they were going to die, and yet Jesus was asleep in the stern of the boat on a pillow. It's disturbing because you have such difference between the heart and focus and contentment of Jesus and his disciples, and you can put yourself in that place. And it's disturbing because you may feel like that at times, where you're like, everything's going to pot, everything's going bad, the storm is coming, everything's here, and yet your sense of Jesus is that he is just at rest. And how was he able to do that? Well, he had complete contentment in his life because he was a part of the greater story of God. And even though he experienced certain circumstances, he was a part of this bigger thing that he and the Father were doing. And he knew that the Father would take care of him. He trusted the strength and the protection of the Father completely. I think that's what throws us out of contentment a lot of times, is feeling unsafe. I know it is for me, that when I don't feel safe, I don't feel content. And I was thinking about this too, about opening up to it. I think it's one of the most difficult things that we're called to do as Christians is, okay, I'm going to trust in Jesus as my Savior. That means that I get eternal life in the here and now. And when I pass through the other side, when my body dies, I'm going to be with God and in this place, this where it's called heaven. That all sounds good. But then to take myself and to shrink in a way and to sacrifice my life and to lose my life in a way that I'm going to take my story and have it encompassed by him and to have him wrap himself around my life. I'm not wrapping around his, but for me to become a part of his, I think it's difficult. And as I've talked to people, it's over the years, my marriage is bad or my job is bad or my finances are bad or, I'm bad, whatever you go to and do counseling. And what do you think God's doing in this? Well, I don't know. I've asked him to fix it and it doesn't seem to be doing it. Well, tell me about how, you're walking in relationship to him. Tell me about how you're sacrificing, like sacrificial living. Tell me about how you're stewarding what he's given you. Tell me about that your life is not your own, like Paul says, but, that you were bought with a price and that you are his. And it's hard for people to open up to that, because the idea sometimes can be like, that Jesus is this cosmic butler and he just gets things for us. When in reality, he's God. And we now are his. He is ours, but we are his. And so it's difficult for us to open up to that it's really a laying down of our lives. And something that made me think of that was, I have this old Ford truck, and right now it needs some TLC. Well, a lot of the time it needs TLC, but it gives me stuff to do. Michelle drove it the other day. Typically, I don't like to have her drive it because she breaks it even more. It's not her fault. I don't know that we call the truck Mater, like from Cars, and I don't think that Mater and her like each other because it's just first time she drove it, she ripped the shifting stick out of it, and it's so strong, and so it had a problem before it happened. But so the other day I felt really bad because right now currently one door is tied shut because it won't close, like the passenger side. You'd be impressed if you saw a picture of it. I have a picture if you want to see. But it's tied shut from here to the back seat. And then the driver's side door, now I will confess, this has been this way since last winter and beyond. You have to roll down the window, reach out to open the door to get out. And but here's the problem. The key, like the ignition right now, has a problem, and so it doesn't align up, and so you have to really tweak that thing to get the key to go in and turn it right. And but I have a plan to fix all these things. So so the problem is the other night we were spraying Steve was spraying the lot to get the weeds out of here. And I'm going to stop real soon. I know this is really complicated, but and so Michelle had to go back out. She was here for the women's event. She had to go back out to move the truck. Well, she got in and she couldn't get it started. And so the problem is that she couldn't get out. And so she honked at different women that were arriving for the event, and no joke, some of them just said, "Hey," and they just came in, and she's like, "No." And Michelle's a really nice person. She's not going to keep laying on the horn. So I don't want to inconvenience anybody. And so finally, Judy Champion saw her, and she goes, so Michelle opened up the little triangle window. "Hello, can you help me?" And so, anyways, all I have to say is that Judy Champion opened up so Michelle could get out. And but it can kind of seem that way to open up, to take my life and truly just set it right smack dab in the middle of the story of God and what he's doing. And yet I don't know that contentment comes any other way. Just take it all, just absolutely everything, and just put it down in there and say, you know what? This may not be okay now, but ultimately I know that it's going to be okay because of God's bigger story. Right? How does God's bigger story go? Well, after Habakkuk, Jesus came as Messiah. And then we know that Jesus is going to come again. And when he comes again, everything's going to be right. The lion's going to lay down with the lamb. There's going to be no more tears. There's going to be no more dying. There's going to be no more division. There's going to be no more pain. There's going to be no more death. There's going to be no more cancer. Right? Everything will be healed. I mean, doesn't that sound good? And that seems that many times is God's answer when people really push for questions and complaints. As he says, let me tell you what's happening. And so we don't always get an answer for the specific thing. Now, what God does give to Habakkuk is he shares an answer that has to do with look, I know you're concerned about the Babylonians. Let me tell you about some of the things that I know about the Babylonians. Let me tell you about some of the things that they do. And let me tell you what ultimately happens. And what God's sharing is he's sharing that divergent paths eventually lead to a divergent destination. This is what's hard, is that we many times will take different paths and unhealthy things and sin, which is anything that damages our relationship with God and with other people. And we take those divergent paths. And what the hard thing is that we don't end up at the divergent destination right away. And what I mean by that is we used to go backpacking a lot through the Sierras in California, through Yosemite, and we'd take high school students every summer. And, it would never fail. Every other trip or so, one of our leaders would say, "I know the way." And they would misread the map, or I would misread the map, full disclosure. And we didn't feel like anything was wrong because we're in the midst of beautiful mountains. We're doing what we came to do, which is backpack. But then all of a sudden, we would end up at really bad terrain where it's like, oh, this is bad. This is unsafe. Or we would end up at a completely different place. And the danger is that we'd have to backtrack and go back, or we'd have to go down a different way, and it's unsafe. And so what God's saying is it may seem like everybody's just hiking along here, and they are, but when you diverge from the right path, God's way, the way of Jesus, you will end up at a divergent destination. So this is what he shares with them. He's saying, hey, all's going to be dealt with. So first he deals with pride. So he says, woe to the proud. And we're going to move through these pretty quick. So he says, verse 4, see, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest. Because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion? How long must this go on? Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their prey. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. So pride is in every nook and cranny of this world. Pride is in every nook and cranny of every neighborhood. And, if it's in the wealthy, it's in the poor. It's in the, it's in the good looking, it's in the less good looking. Pride is everywhere. It's in every nook and cranny, and everyone can suffer from it. And even those that have it, it just can wreak havoc on those. God's design of faith, though, if you saw verse 5, is that the righteous will live by faith. See, pride ultimately is saying, well, I have a different way. Or like hiking, I have a different path. I think we can get there this way. Well, I'm pretty sure that that's not the way. And so pride says that way. But God says that those that are righteous will live by faith. And so the New Testament writers quote this passage here, Habakkuk 2 verse 5, 3 times in the New Testament. Verse 4 is what it is. In Romans 1:17, Hebrews 10:38, Galatians 3:11. Also, too, Martin Luther, who really brought people back to a place of trusting in God by faith, not by works. That was a key passage for him in the Protestant Revolution and what he brought about. And so faith leads people to an indirect obtaining of righteousness. Indirect, in other words, that no one can boast. No one can say, I became righteous on my own. Isn't that brilliant of God to say, you know what? No one can be proud when it comes to having right standing with God and right standing with people. There's not one that can do that. If scientists or an investigator, private detective, were to investigate someone that was righteous, a Christian that was righteous, had a right relationship with God and right relationship with others, if they looked through things and investigated, they would find a missing link by just looking at the person's life. Because they would compare and they say, nope, there's no way. Nothing in this person, if they investigated every person that has ever come to salvation in God, not one person would they say, yep, there's that factor in them. It's always indirect. There's nothing in you, there's nothing in me that would equate to righteousness, right relationship with God and others. It's always the X factor of Jesus, by faith in Jesus. Ephesians 2:8-9, Paul wrote, for it is by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God. Now listen, not by works, so that no one can boast. So no one can be prideful. It's always indirect righteousness. And then he goes on and he says, woe to the greedy. In verse 9, he says, woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many peoples, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. So unjust gain speaks of covetousness. And is gain in itself bad? Like, is it bad to get a return for your work or a return for your money if you invest? Not at all. But the idea here is that it's that I want it all. It's all mine. And so there's no thought of anybody else. It's also the thought that if I get this gain, then I will insulate myself from all evil. in all bad. And so it's a trusting in this gain, trusting in this place. And it says that, that this person kind of sets things up so high that nothing can touch me. And then it says too, it's that actually what they've built will actually speak to them of the evil in those things. So you can't trust in the gain because it really entraps you at the end of the day. And then verse 12, it says, woe to those full of power. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So when it says builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town of justice, so a person full of power that would use that and use it for power of those that don't have power, and use it in a way that would cause violence and damage. That because I have power, then I would take that and force that upon others in any way. That I would use that to get what I want, or you to use that to get what you want. People of power think that they're in control, that are full of power. In other words, just like, I'm in control. I'm the top of the top, or I can do this and nobody else can. But they're not. God's in control. Proverbs 16 verse 32 says, better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control, or you could say contentment, than one who takes a city. And so no matter how much power you have or I have or anybody has, we need to remember that ultimately God is in control. Verse 14 says, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. What does that have to do with it? Well, what it's saying is saying that, there's a bunch of people like these people, like the Babylonians, like you and I, we think we're heavyweights. Whatever your world is, where maybe you think you're a heavyweight, or I think I'm a heavyweight, or anybody thinks they're a heavyweight, like, man, I'm really the stuff. It's saying the true heavyweight, it will be very clear that who the true heavyweight is, which is God. See, glory speaks of like a weight. It's the substance of somebody, like the weight of somebody. And it's saying, look, you will have true knowledge. It will be known by all of who the true heavyweight is, and it's Jesus. I mean, think about it. Does it say of anybody else that every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord? Not just Christians, but every single person will have to confess and bow their knee to Jesus because he alone is Lord. Next, it says, woe to the drunk, or those that consume and have other people consume so that their realities are changed. Verse 15, it says, woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk so that they can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done in Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities, and everyone in them. So this can be applied to those that put themselves and others under the control of alcohol or other substances, or media for manipulation or gain or entertainment, or to mask reality. It's just saying is like if you use something to change reality for you, or to use it to change reality for others, or change things for them, then this is speaking of that. Speaking of alcohol, specifically, it results in 5.2 million accidental injuries and 1.8 million deaths each year. Just with alcohol. It's estimated that 1 out of every 4 deaths is caused by drugs and alcohol, according to the World Health Organization. And so, facts, right? I mean, it's when we put ourselves under the control of drugs or alcohol or any other substance, we're putting ourselves into something that we say, hey, I'm going to put myself into an uncontrollable situation. It's not saying you can't drink, But it's just saying when you set out to get drunk or cause others people to get drunk, it's going to cause havoc. It's going to cause damage. It's just how it is. Proverbs 20 verse 1 says that wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whoever's led astray by them is not wise. The Bible's pretty awesome. It just tells it like it is. If you put yourself under its control, then it'll get you. And so it also has to do with, I think, content too. I mean, you can, in those that produce it, can you imagine, being a person that, produces pornography for people to consume, for people to, have like an alternate reality and really ultimately rewire their brains when it comes to, what they think and experience about sex and to put people into that place. Can you imagine being that person? That is how you would prosper and that what you do to people. And then also too, if you consume that, that you're putting yourself into a place where there's a different reality. It's not real. It's not real at all. And so whether drugs or alcohol or anything, or you use ways of talking or you use different media to manipulate people. Can you imagine being a politician these days? I mean, it's built in, both sides, all sides, whatever party, it's built in that the game is to manipulate. It's to manipulate. And well, I know, but that's how it's done. Well, it's demonic. Anything that changes reality, anything that manipulates is demonic. And that's why it's saying, woe to those that take part in this. And then lastly, it's woe to the idolater. And so verse 18 through 20, it says, of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trust in his own creation, he makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. So the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. So making physical or created things an object of undue attention or worship or a god is idolatry. You may not have stones or wood that you tend to do that with today, or maybe you do. People have crystals and rocks and all sorts of things they put heart and mind into and like to bring in their lives. And you say, well, I don't do that, but what do you have in your pocket? Our phones can be idols. Our computers can be idols. And it says they're overlaid in gold and silver. Computers these days. And all these things we use, but again, what meaning do you give to it? Like, do you give to it that this is the answer, right? What's the answer today? Well, you need to know something. Well, what does Google say? Well, what does that say? Well, a lot of that stuff's manipulated. A lot of that stuff's built to manipulate and do all sorts of things. And so who knows where the answer is coming from? I looked up something the other day, like, hey, what about this verse and what are these things? And Google it, and the answers looked pretty okay, but then it was from a cult. And so it's like an entryway. They put things that are true and then what's this place? So I know, but somebody else that maybe doesn't know those things and goes down like, this is the way to get in there. And so what it says in verse 20 is it says, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. So what is it saying? Let all the earth be still. Hush. Remember when you were a kid, maybe your parents told you, just hush. Just hush. That's what God's saying is God's saying, look, the real God, the true God, is sitting down in his temple. He has not moved and he's in control. So how do we take this home along with Habakkuk? Well, we come back to contentment. Come back to the place and say, God, you will deal with all things. And so I'm not, because all those things we just read, those have to do with not being content, going after other things. The real question is Jesus enough? Is God enough? Is it enough to just say, I'm going to just get everything I need from him? I'm not going to go get things myself. I'm going to trust him. And so we come back to contentment. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 10, he said, sorrowful, yet always rejoicing, poor, yet making many rich, having nothing, and yet possessing everything. What a statement of contentment. Having nothing and yet possessing everything. And you may think about it, remember, what he's saying is saying that because I have Jesus and Jesus has me, I have everything. In your own life, Israel would always say, well, didn't he do this? Isn't he the one that set us free? Isn't he the one that parted the Red Seas? Isn't he the one that did this? But isn't he the one in your life that when you were sick, he healed you? Or isn't he the one in your life where you cried out to him and everything seemed unstable and he set you on solid ground? Isn't he the one that forgave you of your sins? Isn't he the one that provides for you? And isn't he the one that protects you sometimes when you know and you don't? Isn't he the one that when you need peace, he brings it to you? Isn't he the Alpha and the Omega? Isn't he the beginning and the end? Isn't he God Almighty? Isn't he the one that defeated death itself and forgave all of our sins? Isn't he the one that protects us from the enemy of our souls? Isn't that the one that you and I can trust in? May we find contentment in him as we rest in him. Even though the storms come, we rest completely in him. And that's what Habakkuk is learning, and I pray that we do as well.